I wrote it for a class last year here at CC, like Ruthie said, that was talking about sort of the legacy of the atomic bombs in Japan, and I couldn't get over the fact that there are still active nuclear warheads in Colorado while we were talking about and grieving the destruction that had happened in Japan. So that's why I wrote this essay. And it's called Shadows. Without time to defend and fight back, the wilderness was forced into silence. Kayoko Hayashi, From Trinity to Trinity. In the early hours of July 16, 1945, a small group of scientists and army commanders gathered in a control bunker in the desert of New Mexico, about 35 miles from Socorro. They were there to oversee the first nuclear test in history, to witness the atomic bomb come to life at last from the pages of science fiction. The bomb, nicknamed Trinity, hung from a 100-foot tower, suspended over the desert as the sun cast its first pinkish light over the sand. In the control bunker, the radio frequency that the military was using to broadcast the countdown to the test suffered interference from a local radio station. By a strange fluke, the commanding officers of the operation heard the strains of Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings drift out of their radio as the final seconds expired and the bombs dropped. Stepping outside, officers and scientists were hit by a wave of heat and pressure from the world's first atomic weapon. In the first few seconds of the new era that was ushered in that morning, at 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the orchestra played on, but the desert was silent. We are living in a silence that hasn't been broken. It is a wordless cry that emanates from the grasslands of North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, the high plains of Wyoming, Nebraska, Missouri, and Colorado. This is the nuclear heartland, where the pulse of a quiet and terrible power still beats silently beneath our feet. The Trinity test set the stage for an era of unprecedented and unstoppable weapon development. At the end of the Second World War, tensions with USSR fueled the United States' drive to continue building new and improved weapons of mass destruction in vast quantities. In the 1950s, propelled by fear of being left behind in the arms race and the desire to close the perceived missile gap, the United States turned its attention to the skies and launched its military space program in full force. Soon, the first effective intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, was developed. With their ability to fly thousands of miles into enemy territory and deliver a crippling, fatally precise blow at the touch of a button, they were hailed as the latest and most efficient delivery system for nuclear warheads. The missiles were designed to be stored in underground silos, where they would wait in a state of perpetual readiness, attended to at all hours of the day by military personnel and scientists. Each missile had its own silo, with 10 of these silos clustered around a launch center. The spacing of the missile silos was strategic, each missile situated at least 4.2 miles from the next, to ensure that each would have to be independently targeted in the event of a nuclear attack. The ICBMs needed space, and the wide, open expanses of the country's grasslands and high plains beckoned, the perfect storage site for a nuclear arsenal, and, by default, a perfect sponge to soak up a nuclear attack. The original ICBMs carried 3 nuclear warheads, each with 15 to 20 times more destructive force than the individual bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 1962, the same year my mother was born, was the year of the big payoff in missiles, and the Minuteman missile was unveiled. Named after the Revolutionary War rebels who could be ready to fight in 1 minute or less, Minuteman missiles could be launched in exactly 31 seconds, reaching their targets up to 6,000 or 7,000 miles away in less than half an hour. By July 1975, 30 years after the first atomic bomb was dropped in the desert of New Mexico, the United States military had 1,000 Minuteman missiles, rooted like invasive species in the grasslands of Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Missouri, and Colorado. The skin of the land had been peeled back, weapons dropped into bunkers, and the incisions stitched back up with a set of nuclear bomb-proof concrete doors. Of the 1,000 nuclear missiles that were once sown into the soils of the Great Plains, 150 are still on active alert today. 49 of these active alert missiles are in Colorado. They lie sleeping ever so lightly behind concrete doors built into the landscape of wind and grass, an unnatural entryway into the heart of the earth. Farmers and ranchers have learned to turn their tractors and run their stock around barbed wire fences that have slowly faded into the yellows and browns of the grasslands. What does it mean to have 49 active nuclear sites in our backyard? I was born in 1992 in a green and white house on a peaceful road called Cheyenne Boulevard that winds around the base of Cheyenne Mountain. I always felt held when I looked up at the round, blue dome of sky, encircled by a ring of familiar summits and ridges. Growing up, I measured the long school days by the bells of a shrine that stands halfway up the mountain, ringing reassuringly every 15 minutes. 15 minutes is the maximum amount of time the President of the United States would have to decide whether to retaliate to a nuclear threat against this country. It would happen like this. An enemy missile is detected by satellites, which would beam the information straight into the heart of Cheyenne Mountain, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, more commonly known as NORAD, hidden deep beneath the surface. Officers confirm the attack and alert the President, and the clock starts ticking. 15 minutes to decide how to respond, maybe less. Deciding to launch a retaliatory missile, the President sends a message to an underground missile control center in northeastern Colorado. 2 keys inserted into 2 different control boxes, and a launch is initiated. The concrete doors blockading the entrance to the silo are blown away like rag dolls, and the 76,000-pound, 60-foot missile man lifts off. It cannot be stopped, called back, intercepted. It will deliver its blast within half an hour. The whole chain of command, starting with the President's order, has taken less than 2 minutes. In a city far away, everyone within a 2.5-mile radius of the strike is vaporized. At the periphery, fires begin to rage. What does it mean to have 49 active nuclear sites in our backyard? It means that the years between 1945 and 2016, and the mileage between Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and our own hometowns are malleable. It means that the silence of screams turned to vapor echoes across the windy grasslands of northeastern Colorado. It means the shadows of human bodies burned into walls, roads, and bridges by the heat of a 70-year-old atomic explosion are slipping between the chain links of missile silos turned yard ornaments. It means that the silence of the wilderness that began to spread on 5:29 a.m., July 16, 1945, when the Trinity test bomb was dropped, lingers on today. But it is not an unchallenged silence. For the past 40 years, it has been pierced by the sound of song, peace prayers, protests, the ringing of hammers beating symbolically against the metal of missile silos, turning weapons into plowshares. It is impossible to mention every act of peaceful resistance that has been carried out in this community and others around the country, in witness against the horrors of weapons of mass destruction. These witnesses are mothers, fathers, children, priests, nuns, veterans, teachers, students. People who realize that in this new era of radioactive time, both years and geography are irrelevant. They see the spatial and temporal map of the atomic bomb, where each moment is connected to a dozen others, each coordinate's distance from the next merely an abstraction, a projection of intimate networks stretched across paper. In 1989, a Colorado Springs-based group, Citizens for Peace and Space, carried out a symbolic action at Falcon Air Force Base, located just 19 miles east of the city. Pulling a stock trailer onto the base, they released 2 buffalo onto the grasslands and sprinkled native buffalo grass seed until being escorted off the base property. For a few short minutes, As the buffalo roamed the land they used to dominate, the silence of the fenced-in grassland was shattered. The beating of buffalo hoofs pierced the air, and for a brief time, the sounds of life were reawakened. Thank you.